E911 Talk podcast, episode 73, for Monday, February 27, 2012.
Welcome to this edition of E911 Talk with your host, Mark Fletcher, pilot line manager for emergency services at Avaya. Now, here's Fletch.
As I'm sure you've seen, one of the new buzzwords for public safety in 2012 is Next Generation 911. And one of the features that is reportedly being clamored for is texting to 911. The reason people want this feature is not because they need to send, "Yo Popo, this dude be jacking me up," although that does highlight a whole new breed of interpreters that would be required. 911 is supposed to be ubiquitous, available everywhere and equally to anyone who needs it. But for a long time, it's been expected to be especially beneficial for those that are hearing impaired. The problem is that there's no magic wand that can be waved that will easily allow you to text messages from phones to carry the ever-important location information. It really gets under my skin when I see headlines that say, "Text to 911 now possible," or something similar. Typically, when you read through the article, there's very little mention of the technology that'll be used to provide this valuable service. Now, granted, I don't read every single article ever written, but I'm constantly on the hunt for the announcement that this technology has been bridged. In Columbus, Ohio recently, Franklin County announced an upgrade to its wireless 911 call center that will allow texting and eventually pictures and video. Now, the article included several quotes from John Moore, CEO of the Deaf Services Center in Worthington. In the article, Moore stated that almost 9% of Ohio's population is either deaf or hearing impaired. Unfortunately, this community of individuals is often treated as a second-class citizen when it comes to 911. Although the American Disabilities Act requires that public safety answer points maintain TTY, TDD equipment, there are hundreds of stories where deaf individuals have had difficulties reaching 911, and ultimately they had to call someone who was able to hear and ask them to make a phone call for them. An amazing person that I met while serving on the FCC EAC in Washington was Sherry Farina. Sherry's got an amazing story where her husband was doing some work around the house and, as many husbands do, severely injured himself using that thing we call a tool. I can say that because I myself put a screwdriver through my hand just a couple of weeks before my wedding, which prevented me from wearing my wedding band due to the swelling. At least that's the story I'm sticking with, and I've got a doctor's note to prove it. Getting back to Sherry's story, she dialed 911 with her TTY, and for whatever reason, the PSAP did not detect the TTY and treated it as a silent call. She tried again and still was not able to establish communication. Fortunately, due to that PSAP's policy of silent 911 calls, they ended up sending a patrol car by the address where Sherry was able to flag down the cruiser and get medical help for her husband. If you're interested in following Sherry's activities as an advocate for deaf and hard of hearing individuals, I encourage you to follow her on Twitter at XOSherry. That's XOSHERI. Now this brings me to the slippery slope of my podcast. In a report from local ABC affiliate Channel 6 that highlighted texting to 911 in Franklin County, Ohio, the report ended with this bit of information that unfortunately is true.
And we've also learned that the number to text most likely will not be 911, but some other combination that's easy to remember.
This is one of my pet peeves. We talk about texting to 911 with Next Generation 911, but inevitably, we're talking about getting a text message to a 911 center, which is very different than addressing your emergency text to the digits 911.
The number to text most likely will not be 911.
Now, on the surface, you might not see this as a major problem, but as was reported in this news story, the number won't be 911, but another easy-to-remember number. So let's put this in perspective. In the average day, during your commute to work or while running around taking care of errands, how many different cities do you pass through? Is the town served by a municipal PSAP, or is it the county? And what about when you're on a highway? Is it the state police? When you're traveling state to state, are you always aware when you cross the state line? Now, obviously, these are all questions that require us to carry around a briefcase full of maps, GPS, and a book of all the agencies and their different but, quote, easy to remember, unquote, shortcodes. Now, I'm sorry, folks, but this is just impractical, and it's not really solving any problem. We have to solve the routing problem for text messages that allow a single, ubiquitous number to be directed to the proper authorities based on a device's location. Until we have that, we won't really have texting to 911. That might be a bit of an unpopular thing to say, but today it is in fact the truth. The problem is text messages are routed completely differently from calls from cellular devices. One way to solve that problem that is being deployed in Canada sidesteps that problem by having the PSAP initiate the text messaging session after a normal voice session is established. What happens is a special flag is placed on the user's ANI record that indicates that the caller is hearing impaired and has opted in for text messaging communication on that particular device. The 911 call taker then initiates a text message session to the person calling. Now, is that solution perfect? Well, what it does do is it moves us in the right direction without degrading service, requiring specific equipment, or forcing expensive hardware upgrades on either side. Next generation 911 won't solve the problems we experience today, but it will, however, lay down the groundwork with the network topology that'll allow the conveyance of multimedia and messages between a caller who needs help and the call taker that can provide that help. For links to the stories and media that are mentioned in this week's podcast, be sure to check out my blog at www.avaya.com/Fletcher. And don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Fletch911.
You've been listening to the E911 Talk podcast with your host, Mark Fletcher, product line manager for emergency services at Avaya. E911 Talk is a weekly podcast available on sites like this, as well as iTunes, and is available free of charge. If you have any comments or questions, you can email Fletch at fletcherm@avaya.com. That's Fletcher, the letter M, at avaya.com. Be sure to listen in next week for more informative topics on E911.